Helen talked to us about Jesus healing the crippled woman, who had been bent double for 18 years, spending her life looking down at the ground. Helen then talked about the backlash from the leaders of the synagogue, who were indignant at Jesus healing on the Sabbath. In his eyes, Jesus was working. Well, here we are again in our reading today, and again it occurs on the Sabbath. What our reading misses out is the verses from 1 to 7. And the bit we miss, Jesus heals a man with dropsy. Apparently not a life-threatening condition. Usually it involved extreme swelling of the abdomen and curvature of the spine. Again, the sort of affliction which would be distressing to him and single him out and make him the subject of curiosity. But the main subject of the reading today is the parable that Jesus told those present, and is based on him observing how the guests try to position themselves in the places of honour at the table. Now, prejudice of any kind is hard to deal with, let alone live with. So seen from that perspective, the story of the great banquet might prove something of a challenge. To be sure, there's nothing in it to indicate racial prejudice, but it's hard to miss the religious and class prejudice that seeps from pretty much every word. Jesus had gone out to eat at the home of a very prominent Pharisee, and it appears he's not the only one to have been invited. It seems that many of the community's best have come, just to see this new teacher. And here they were at dinner with the other big knobs from the church and society, and we might think that by attending the banquet, Jesus was taking a break from his busy schedule. But that would be a mistake. Jesus was on another mission, teaching people about the coming of his kingdom. He's seeking to help people understand what God intended and how he was going to accomplish it. This meal being eaten on the Sabbath, and according to the law of God, you weren't supposed to work on the Sabbath because it was a day of rest. But the Pharisees felt that the word of the Lord was too vague. They decided to help God out by defining what word was. Something I wasn't aware of until I researched it is that in Jesus' day there were some 1,500 different ways of breaking the Sabbath law. And one that intrigued me was the one that said a person with an artificial limb was not allowed to put it on because it was considered to be carrying the burden. To put it another way, the Pharisees cared more about rules than they did about people. And it's people who are the foundation on which the kingdom of God was to be built. So it isn't really surprising that Jesus, the cornerstone of our kingdom, spent so much time with people. The Pharisees had forgotten this simple fact because the most important thing in the world to them was to keep the rules. They were more intent on being right than on being righteous. Now I know that sometimes I've been guilty and been more impressed with an ecclesiastical building and the things that go on there than perhaps the more important about how it can change people's lives. There is another prejudice Jesus confronts. It's the one that says God is selective about the people who are important. This was a lesson that those who fought for the best seats needed to hear, but it also applies to those who don't believe the best seats are reserved for them. Jesus is always watching us, especially how we treat others. I've been to churches where they have a number of ways of avoiding people and of doing religion instead. Take a simple thing like greeting people at the church door. Stephen, Ray, Helen and I hope, greet you as friends. But in some churches it's absent, or it becomes an exercise which fits into a description of pastoral care. In those churches, I'd have to say they've moved away from a people-focused thing and gone into doing a religious-focused thing. I also know if I turn in a particular direction, I will see familiar faces in their usual positions. Jennifer and Pauline, Doris and Doris, Tanya and Teresa. You're out of position, Jim. Alice, because here. Joyce at the back. I believe that not one of us would be upset to find a new face sitting in our usual place. I believe we'd be delighted to see it, while in some churches, some people would actually be upset. When we forget why the church exists and begin to believe that it's there to meet our agenda and not God's, then we're on a slippery slope to a difficult future. That was the attitude that Jesus saw on display at the banquet that day, and that was the prejudice he confronted. You see, we don't need to jockey for a position in the kingdom of God. God has given every one of us a seat, a place, a task, a mission, which is peculiar to us. God didn't make multiple copies of identical, repetitive children. We are all unique in his sight and capable of accomplishing something that no other person can. God has called each of us, every one of us, to put his hand to the plough. And there's a task that God has called us to that no other Christian will be able to accomplish. If you and I don't follow Jesus and live as God calls us, it'll not get done. And I find that kind of scary. You and I, out of all of the nearly 7 billion people on the face of the earth, have a unique mission for the furthering of the kingdom of God. The good thing is we're on this roller coaster ride ahead together. We experience the same ups and downs, the unexpected curves, and the bumps along the way. Everything we do, we experience together. We worship together, we have fellowship together, we serve together. We invest in each other's lives, and in doing so, we make ourselves open and vulnerable to share not only our hopes and joys, but also our pain and brokenness. I think there's a subtle but significant message for the modern church in Jesus' parable. Jesus hates pride, but religious pride is the worst of all. When we, like the Pharisees, think that we have a special place in God's family because of something we've done, or a particular theory we embrace, or because in our own minds we belong to the right church, or the length of time we've been followers of Jesus, Jesus says, guess what? These other guests of mine are just as important. All of the guests will be equal, rich and poor will sit side by side because they are the same. Every time I prepare a sermon, he speaks to me. Sometimes he speaks in volumes and I've got very little to do. Sometimes he says very little and I have a lot more research to do. It's at those times when I believe that God's trying to teach me something, and the only way I can learn is to embark on a voyage of discovery for myself. The right people will be at God's banquet. They will be everyone who responds to God's invitation. The poor and the outcast will be seated next to Jesus, not necessarily the dignitaries and people of position and prominence. We must not erect social barriers that keep some people from joining us at God's table. The less fortunate in our society need both our natural gifts and the dignity that comes with being acknowledged. They need the gift of our friendship, and we need them just as much as well. At this point in Luke's Gospel, Jesus is on his way to Jerusalem, and along the way, he's showing the disciples who God is and how they are to live a life that reflects a hospitable God. He is, I believe, teaching us the same lessons today.